Today we're going to talk about post-traumatic stress and how it's affecting our veterans in the military. On 9/11/2001, America witnessed in horror and shock of a heinous act of terror brought upon our nation. It was our big city, New York City, Washington, D.C., but it could have been Jacksonville because it affected all Americans. One thing we knew, we were at war. 16 years later, we're still at war. 6,000 of our all-voluntary force military have been killed in action. Over 1 million of our kids, and I call them kids because I'm older, and I'm a mom, and I'm a grandma, but our kids, over 1 million, have been disabled and can no longer function in the military. Half of that number suffers from post-traumatic stress. What is post-traumatic stress? Post-traumatic stress is trauma, severe trauma. Now, any of you, and maybe some of you, have suffered trauma, severe trauma. Maybe a car wreck, a horrific car wreck, maybe a fire, maybe a rape. But generally speaking, that's a one-time event, and you'll never forget it. But in the case of the military and our multiple deployments today, because of 16 years of war, we're seeing trauma over and over and over again. So what they experience one day, they go right back out and experience it the next, until the next day becomes months, and months become years of deployments. What are the symptoms of post-traumatic stress? Anxiety, depression, night terrors, terrible night terrors. They call them the demons that come to them in the night. Panic attacks, survivor's guilt, anger. And in my opinion, isolation is the worst. They can no longer go back to what they did. They can no longer go back and be part of their unit. Actually, they can no longer go back to war. They can't even get a job because of the repetitive trauma. It has basically broken them, and this disability is invisible. You don't see it. So maybe some of you in the audience, in fact, I know of one that does suffer from post-traumatic stress. He looks like everybody else. You wouldn't know it. But believe me, it's a deadly disease. We're losing, unfortunately, 20 to 22 veterans a day due to suicide. Now I'm going to repeat that, 20 to 22 veterans a day to suicide. That's unacceptable. What are we doing to change it? My own son did 2 deployments in Iraq. He was a K9 police officer from Ohio, a bomb dog specialist. At the time when the war broke out in Iraq, they needed bomb dog handlers. So he volunteered to go to Iraq as a bomb dog specialist, and he did 2 tours there. And as a police officer, a trained police officer, I thought he was prepared for almost anything. I was truly wrong. He came home, and I was so thrilled to have him home, but he was not the same. He was gone. He was lost in the abyss of war. He was suffering from post-traumatic stress. In my day, they called it shell shock from the Vietnam War. Today, it's post-traumatic stress. Post-traumatic stress is a disability. It's recognized under the ADA. It's recognized under the Department of Justice. And most importantly, it's recognized in the VA. So I did a lot of research on how can I help my son. How can I help other veterans suffering from this debilitated, deadly disability? I came up with one article, a small article, where one company out in California was having some success with service dogs to help mitigate the symptoms of this disability. And of course that hit me because my son was a dog trainer and a dog handler. So I approached him. Really, it was the last resort. What can I do to help him? We had tried therapy. We had tried medication. He began drinking. it was getting worse, not better. He could no longer go back to work as a police officer. He couldn't function. He isolated from his family, his child, his mom. So I approached him on the idea, why don't we start a nonprofit that would provide service dogs, trained service dogs, to these veterans that are suffering like you. And as a trainer, I saw the light come on for the first time. I knew there was still a spark of hope inside of him. So 7 years ago, that's when K9s For Warriors was born. We began a program. We didn't know how to start a nonprofit. We had no idea where we were going to get the money, a facility, the dogs. But we worked hard as a family. And we got the dogs from the shelters because those dogs are suffering their own post-traumatic stress. So we began our program, and I knew that giving a serviceman a dog was not the only answer. We had to change their thinking. We had to get them to leave the war behind them and move forward in life with dignity and independence. So fast forward 7 years later, we're now in a beautiful 30,000 square foot facility in Nocatee, Florida. We have kennels for 120 dogs that are being trained 365 days a year. We bring our veterans in that all have suicidal thoughts, all are broken, but we bring them in for a 3-week program where we honor them, we respect them, and we give a purpose to live again. Now, their dog is a tremendous part of that. So you might ask, what does the service dog do? Well, that dog is a prescription on 4 legs. That dog is saving their lives. We pull all of our dogs from shelter. I'm going to say 95% of them are pulled for shelter. Owners surrender. We have a puppy program. I know you all want to see my puppies. So our dogs are trained for months and months and months. Service dogs have full public access. These are not emotional support dogs. They're not pets. They're not lap dogs. The only place they're not allowed is a sterile environment, say an operating room. That makes sense. We rescue dogs from all over the United States. We have actually rescued almost 800 dogs. By the end of the year, 400 of them will have become fully certified as a service dog. What did we do with the other 400? They did not go back to the shelter. They've all found loving homes. The dogs are trained in specific skills: sit, stay, down, come, heel. We'd all be grateful if our dogs did that, right? That's a major step right there. But we take the dogs further than that. For a veteran, they do not like anybody in their space, particularly someone who's been through so much combat. They don't know what to see or what's coming up on them. The flashbacks come back. They'll see things that we don't see. Someone with a backpack, someone approaching them with something in their side pocket. It could be a bomb. So if someone were to come up fast onto the veteran, that dog gives a nice, gentle barrier between he and that approaching person. It's safety. Many of our veterans have been shot. They've lost a leg. They've been injured. They all carry 90 to 120 pounds of equipment every day out in the desert. So the dogs are taught brace so that they can get up and down out of a seated position or up on the floor. This is my favorite. It's called cover. None of the warriors like anybody approaching them from the rear. And the military, when they go out on their maneuvers, deployments, they will say, he's my battle buddy, no man left behind, and I've got your 6. Got your 6 is exactly what cover is. That dog has the veteran's 6. It's his eyes, his smell, his ears. He's watching out for his veteran. Just because the war is over in Iraq and Afghanistan, in the veteran's mind, that war is right here, right now. Now, We knew service dogs work. By the end of the year, we'll have graduated almost 400 teams. We've had a 99% success rate. Why do I say 99%? Tragically, we lost one female veteran to suicide. But our mission is to prevent suicide because every warrior we've seen has suicidal tendencies. We partnered with Purdue University and the National Institute of Health so that we could have medical proof of why these dogs are working and why they're saving lives. The results have been far more than we could have dreamed of, but the results are coming out. 85% reduction in panic attacks and anxiety, 77% reduction in night terrors. The big one that I'd like to point out is 82% decrease in suicidal thoughts. As I said, anyone suffering from war trauma, post-traumatic stress, has suicidal thoughts. I would like to share with you briefly 3 stories of veterans, and I could give you hundreds. John Matter, MARSOC, Marine, Special Forces, one of the best snipers in our military. John was shot 9 times on 3 different occasions. 3 different deployments, 3 different times he was shot. 9 times. 3 Purple Hearts. That's not what took him out of the military. Post-traumatic stress did. He could no longer do his job. But he had to retire. He came home, he felt like a failure. As a last result, he came to K9s For Warriors, and we placed him with Sir Winston. He doesn't call him Sir, I do. Today, John owns 3 martial arts studios. They've had 2 more children, and he's an advocate for service dogs for veterans suffering like he did. Alex entered the Army young, kind of didn't really know what he was getting into, got deployed. On his 3rd deployment, he was outside the green zone in Baghdad. He was in a vehicle called an MRAP. This is what an MRAP looks like, sort of like a Humvee. His gunnery sergeant was training him to go out in this MRAP. And there was an overpass. And he said, Alex, when we get to that overpass, I want you to swerve the MRAP back and forth because the insurgents would drop bombs on him. Alex did what he was told. The next thing he knew, his gunnery sergeant's head was severed at the neck. There was a thin wire, unbeknownst to our military, that decapitated the gunnery sergeant. That's not something you can unsee. That's not something you can ever forget. We placed Alex with one of my favorite dogs, Skip. It was a rescued Labradoodle. Today, Alex is married. He has 2 amazing children. And he and Skip are going back to school, and he'll graduate next year. And finally, Melissa. When she came to us, Army, she was so badly broken. She had isolated from her family. She couldn't engage with her children. She and her husband were ready to break up. She never left the house. But worst, she stuttered so badly that when she came to us, I couldn't even understand her. She couldn't get her own name out. So we paired her with Chauncey, a beautiful rescue golden. And in 2 weeks, Melissa was speaking normally. She was so elated, her children were elated. She was able to call them on the phone and say, I love you. Today, they've graduated college. Chauncey actually did a little better in school than she did. No surprise, we have excellent dog trainers. But Melissa has graduated with honors at college, so did Chauncey. They marched down the aisle together, and she now has an amazing life, thanks to her dog. Since the military is an all-voluntary force, and they're going through multiple deployments, 16 years, and we're seeing 20 to 22 suicides a day. And it's, as I recap, post-traumatic stress is a result of trauma. What is the VA doing about this? Well, intense therapy works for some, but it's not working well enough. What's the next thing they do? They give them prescriptions. When that fails, they give them more prescriptions. And when all else fails, let's give them a few more prescriptions. The average we see is 14 a day. I had one warrior on 44 medications a day, and he'd never been shot. So the military teaches them how to go to war, but tragically, because of the multiple wars, these kids are not being taught how to come home. So our mission is to save their life. Our mission is to get them back into civilian life with dignity and independence. They deserve that. But more has to be done. More agencies need to follow our pack. They need to follow our lead and save more lives of our nation's greatest asset, our military. But back to my son, who I so worried would be one of those 22. He's now president of K9s For Warriors. He has helped trained over 400 dogs. He has helped saved over 400 lives. I'd like you to meet Brett and his service dog, Reagan. Brett?
Thank you.